lots of our speakers have like double lives, and they have very wide skill sets. I think this is very common in procedural generation. We just seem to mix too many things all at once. And so Tommy's going to talk about the way that he's mixed some slides. So I'm going to leave you go, Tommy. But Tommy Thompson.
All right. Thank you. Woo! That one person. Whoever it was up there, thank you. I'm going to point you out. I'm putting this down. I know I'm going to hurt someone by the end of this talk. Yes, sadly, we do have to maintain that because we're still one nation, that one Scotsman does, or Scotswoman has to come down and give the talk at PROCJAM. Sadly, I don't think I'll be doing as great a job of it as Hazel did last year, but hey, representing. So my name's Tommy Thompson. Some of you might have heard of me before, so if you haven't, awesome. If you do, come say hi. You probably owe me a beer. I'm a lecturer in computer science based at the University of Derby, which is in the middle of England for most people with no real understanding of British geography, so that's most of the Scottish and most of the people in the south of England as well. I still get lost every time I go home. And I'm an AI and games researcher, and I have been now for a few years. I kind of have a habit of talking too much. So I'm kind of really happy about this because I get to finally have one back on my primary school teacher who said to me many years ago, Tommy will never make anything of his life because he talks too much in class. So I do a lot of different things. I actually come from a background, pure computer science, especially looking at how to use automated planning techniques and computational intelligence methods for creating non-player characters in games. Blah, 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 blah. Research to make AI bad guys. And I started getting into procedural generation. But I'll do a lot of other stuff as well. So I host a site called AIingames.com, which is all about trying to openly advocate all the really amazing things that people do in AI research and development in the world of video games. And I also talk on the Plus 40 Science podcast with Mike, just so I have an opportunity to hear his voice every now and then. And we should really be recording more episodes. We've been really slack with that. I also started up doing table flip games. And one of the things behind that was, well, you spend a lot of time talking, and academic life is pretty good because you get to sit in your ivory tower and you go, yes, what would happen if I decided to try and apply this technique in the concept of games? Yes, sounds like a wonderful bloody idea. Lovely. You're going to put it in a game? No! I'm going to get a couple of £100,000 of, money, and I'm going to think about it an awful lot. And I'll publish a bunch of papers. But I'll never make a bloody video game now. Who does that? Nonsense! And I thought, well, maybe I should try and do that. And yeah, anyway, so a quick shout actually to, this is actually a part-time project. What we do at Table Flip is entirely in our spare time whenever we can. It's bedroom programming, really. And it was put together by myself and Matt Syret. Matt is a computer game art lecturer at Anglia Ruskin in Cambridge, the other university in Cambridge, not the one everyone knows about. And the rest of the team, the two other programmers on the team, James and Neil, as well as Molly, these are all people who have day-to-day things. They're all programmers, PhD students, game artists. But on the weekends or when it's 2 o'clock in the morning and they got nothing better to do, they sit and work on our little game. And so this all came about in a really silly way because I was thinking about, I want to do procedural generation. Procedural generation seems like a really cool idea because I always did bots. And anytime when you're using planning or machine learning techniques to create some sort of agent, it's really easy because you have some sort of set of metrics to kind of put it against. But procedural generation really fascinated me because it's this entirely subjective thing. This generative system builds a thing, and then 200 people are going to say it's awesome, 500 people say it's crap, and there's like 50 people in the middle going, eh. In fact, anybody who's been watching the Bob Ross Twitch stream this week will have probably seen this to full effect. It's been absolutely wonderful to watch this generative system, which is actually just a 20-year-old PBS show, getting this real-time feedback of people. And it turned into this wonderful cultural event. An absolute godsend. You're just fortunate that Bob Ross finished last night, or I wasn't going to be here. And so I started thinking about, maybe we should do something with PCG research. That'd be really cool. That'd be great. And Matt comes into my office and he goes, what the f is this? And I goes, look, it's my game. Look, I made a little game in Unity and it's got boxes and they're all funny colors and it's a procedurally generating game and you run through it. And he goes, it looks terrible. Now, Matt's a injecting gender into it and all this nonsense. Really bad idea. So we thought, well, let's try and make a game, and we're going to try and get it out next year. And I've now committed to this, and it's on live stream, so I'm kind of screwed. So if you're kind of new to this, and particularly for anyone who's coming to PROCJAM the first time, if you're maybe new to game development, I thought I'd do the obligatory thing and actually talk about what infinite runners are. Because I was thinking of what's the simplest problem I could try and solve in an infinite runner, in a procedural generation world. And I'm like, infinite runners, that's a nice idea. So infinite runners, constantly expanding environment, you're just running in one direction, new stuff comes your way, you find a way to beat it. And it's all about trying to predict the challenge that's ahead of you. It's the challenge of the unknown. The game's going to continually change itself, but it changes itself within very tight constraints. And there's a number of different examples of this. Temple Run over here. On the far right, that's Spider-Man Unlimited. Something that's similar to it, but different. This is actually prescribed levels in an endless runner fashion. That's Rayman Fiesta Run. But it all comes largely from a game called Cannibal, which I got really attached to when I discovered it, because it was so simple, but it worked so well. And particularly if you're interested, I'm going to make an infinite runner. That's what I'm going to do at PROCJAM. A lot of it is really just building objects in certain places and then figuring out the right heights to have them so that you can then make some sort of challenge for players. Bear in mind that Flappy Bird is essentially an infinite runner, but it's an infinite flapper rather than run because it doesn't let work. And so we've been kind of working away on this for a little while now, and what you're seeing here is actually some footage from the build that we took just to the Game City Festival in Nottingham. We had it there for the last couple of weekends. And what we've got is this gradually expanding world that continues to change the longer you're playing it, and it gets more complex, and ultimately we have to scale it so that over time the worlds are getting much harder to try and overcome. The geography that you're dealing with is becoming harsher, and this is kind of toned down really easy, because all the time you're actually being chased by someone behind you. You can't see him in this footage because I'm too good. But ultimately the deletion wave will catch up and kill me. Now, if you don't really know how this sort of thing works, well, this is actually a snapshot of what sure-footing looks like when I haven't actually started the game. That is pretty much the scene view in the Unity engine that we build it in. And actually the main screen takes place over here to the left, because there's a little corridor where all the pixelites are just hanging out and they're high-fiving and saying hello to each other and all that. And what we do is we then say, right, okay, the game is about to begin, and where do you take it from there? And so, yeah, that's what we have to do. We start with an empty world and say, right, let's build the world in front of the player and create this next, kind of phase of challenge. And this is all being built at runtime, and so kind of an idea of how it really works. But it's quite simplistic, but I seem to have, well, essentially this whole talk is about how I'm reinventing the wheel, because that's what academics do. We like to reinvent the wheel, and then we publish 20 papers about it. Then we smash the wheel, and we go and make another one. But I was really kind of interested in how could you make interesting or kind of varied platforming experiences. And I had two inspirations in this. First of all was some rhythm-based generation, which comes in the Tanagra project. Now, Tanagra was a work done by Gillian Smith, who was an assistant professor at Northeastern University in Boston. And those of you who watched the stream last year or came along will remember that Gillian gave a talk. Gillian's awesome. And what she was doing with Tanagra was she was trying to conceptualize an action space before she generated it. She had this notion of rhythm, and that she wanted players to be doing certain activities for a couple of seconds at a time, and like, right, for 2 seconds you're going to be running, then you're going to do a jump, then you're going to have to like fall over and kill a dude. But also Steve Dalskog, who is a lecturer and also a PhD student currently at Malmö University in Sweden, who's been doing some really interesting work with Staffan Björk and Julian Tegelius on the notion of design patterns, where you try and build a lexicon of game design. And then try and see through that lexicon whether or not you can build some sort of grammar which would allow you to then create that sort of thing. And he's been really interested in Super Mario Brothers, which immediately made us the firmest of friends, because anyone who does Mario research is a friend of mine. It's just because I love Mario. It's not really, I'm an idiot. I just love Mario, and I go, holy Mario, Mario. Anyway, so what do we do when we build it? Well, so originally we start off on the street here on the left, and we end up with a little street here on the right, but the street wasn't there to begin with. So in order to get this working, right, we need to put in the platforms, we need to put in the street, we need to put in the city at the background, and all this is built at runtime, but I've actually got a kind of series of logic that we do it. And this is what we call a sector. And so each sector is designed to be of a certain fixed length, but we want it to be scalable. I want it to be able to gradually increase, because I want the game to become harder the longer you go on. But I also wanted to find a way to parameterize it so that it's not insurmountable for players who are maybe coming to this and they have no idea what they're doing. And maybe there's some people who go, oh yeah, I've played like 20 infinite runners. I know what I'm doing here. This will be fine. And we can then relax these constraints the longer you go on. And so what happens is you start off with something really small like that, and then it begins to get a little bit bigger, and then you fast forward and it does something like that, which you can't really see the gameplay anymore. But yeah, that's going to take you like 10 minutes to cross. That's going to take a really long time. And I don't think anyone's ever actually got that far in the game, not even me, and I made the bloody thing. So with this, how do you actually build it so it's scalable? How do you try and conceptualize this in a way that you can inject constraints into it while you're playing it and say, right, I don't want this, I want you to do that, but I want you to keep it tight, I want you to keep it small for now, and then we'll let it grow in different ways. And what we did was we actually broke it up into two generators. There's actually, well, no, there's about 4 generators in the game right now, but there's 2 that actually handle the gameplay world. So what we first have is this notion of action, and that's what I took from what Gillian was doing, was that she had this idea of conceptualizing particular type of actions you wanted players to execute. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. Why don't we try doing that? This notion of just having flat sprints, or you hit a spring and it launches you up in the air, or you're going to do some sort of hopscotch activity. Running up ramps, running down ramps. Maybe we give you a split in the road. Do you take the high one or the low one? Where does that take you, etc. Now, we had this idea that each of these has a metric. So flat sprinting is a little bit cheaper than, say, running up a hill, but maybe hitting a spring, which is kind of a dramatic sequence to take place, that's considered more expensive. Now, we have different types of action generators, and one of the things, I'll talk about it in a minute, is that I could swap these in and out on the fly. First of all, it's like, right, I'm giving you a budget. You have a certain amount of resource. I'm going to give you X amount of units of resource. Build me a sequence of actions that's going to represent the next sprint. Okay, so maybe I want it to do a bit of running and then a bit of jumping. Maybe we'll go up a spring, we'll fall down a gap. There's maybe one of these crazy zigzag bouncy bits with lots of springs because I think they're really funny. And yeah, cool, right, cool. That's definitely within the budget constraint. But that's one way to do it. And we started thinking about other ways to do it. So first there's this cost-driven approach where we have different ways of doing it. We can either say, just randomly pick a bunch of them and make sure it fits within the constraint of the total budget available. Or we have the what I call random but forgiving, where it's, oh yeah, it's largely random, but it says don't put these 2 things together because players really don't like that, and don't put these 2 things together, which is a bit weird because now I'm injecting biases based upon not only my own interpretation of the game, but also observing players. Other things that I've been working on, one action generator which is nearly done, is what I call the intensity modeler. And I stole an idea off Left 4 Dead, because Left 4 Dead's a really good game. I don't think this is going to be as good as successful as Left 4 Dead. Buy my game, please. But, you know, one of the things that Left 4 Dead does, if you're not familiar with it, is the director system in it is trying to model your intensity. It's trying to figure out how stressed out you are at any given point in time, and it assesses that by the frequency in which you're killing zombies and how close they are to you at the point of their death. So if you've got 20 zombies around you and you're just meleeing them all at this point because you can't reload your gun, it considers you to be rather stressed out. So we thought, well, how can you model the actions here as some sort of element of stress? And this came largely from watching people playing it and watching the bits where they go, and the, So right, so these are the bits that are stressing people out. These are the bits where people feel relaxed. Okay. So we started thinking about, can you just even take the number of jumps in order to complete an action as a representation of the potential stress or intensity of that experience? The number of jumps you do versus the number of falls. Now, these actually have some really interesting impact when you build the physical world. One of the ones that we do use is Y differential. So certain Y differential, like flat sprint has 0 Y differential, but running up a ramp, that's going to have a positive Y differential. Going up a spring and shooting high in the air, that's going to have a big Y differential. And when you generate that, when you say, okay, get the Y differential to a point where we get maximum intensity, then do the opposite, then do it again, and when it generates it, it just generates a roller coaster. Which is kind of cool, but I don't want to do that all the time. So this is when we thought, right, swap things in and out, muck around with it, get players a little bit confused, which is kind of fun. So first you've got this notion of action. What's the actions of this sprint that I want to do? Now I've got to figure out how to build it into the world. And to do that, we actually start taking these prefabricated platforms that Matt actually built for me, and then we start saying, right, well, how do we take, say, a hopscotch and build that in the world? Okay, so we'd probably need like a platform, and then you need another platform that's maybe a little bit higher than the other one, and then a little bit one that's originally on the same Y value as the first one, but it's further over on the x-axis. Cool, nice. But I wanted to be able to express it in different ways. So our geometry generator also has a budget attached to it. So I've got 2 different budget systems here, and this is quite useful for me. I'll come back to that in a second. That long platforms that take me a long time to traverse, which are easier to navigate, they're cheaper. Because I think, all right, okay, so I'm not stressing the player out too much when I'm building that geometric manifestation of the action. But then I can use really short platforms. So these are both actually the same action. It's a hopscotch. But one of them is deemed more expensive than the other. The one on the far right is more expensive because it takes less time to traverse it, and it's deemed to be more intense. Now I'm injecting, again, my own biases in here. So that's kind of not ideal, but I'm kind of working on that. And once we do this, then we actually begin to populate the world with obstacles, which make things more difficult, and coins, which are designed for people to pick up, and they help you unlock items in the game. We have a suite of different power-ups that you can level up and enhance. Now, I thought, oh, cool, right, obstacles. We can just put obstacles in. So why don't I just write a generator that once it builds the geometric space, I just start throwing obstacles on it? Don't do that. It doesn't work. You just end up with 200 obstacles, and people going, I can't get by this bit of the level. No, it's a really bad idea. And this is one of the times where I was very, very specific in that we started attaching obstacle generators to particular actions and saying, right, see when you do this, I'm going to limit how many obstacles you can put on this particular action type. And why is that? Well, I think that you really shouldn't be putting too many here, because if you have like 20 obstacles here, and then like 2 there, and then like 5 there, it's going to be really difficult for the player. So I need to have some means of constraining this. And I actually do this on a per action basis by hand, and I do it largely just by watching players. What's that sweet spot between, challenging to, oh my god, I hate your game? Which is like that wide, by the way, just warning you. One of the other things I've been thinking about is, well, this is all far too prescribed. I'm just like coming up with these horrible ideas of injecting my own biases of how a platforming game should be made. Why don't I just let the damn thing just make its own levels entirely from scratch? So I'd started kind of mucking around recently. This is in the branch of Doom, as it's called, which is the build of the game that only I ever see, and no one else ever gets to see it until like a week before a public demo, and I go, yeah, guys, I've just committed like a whole massive change from the branch of Doom. Like, oh, fuck. And I had this idea of using L systems to just start building little shapes of platforms in the space. Yeah, cool, that looks all right. I don't have any idea if I can actually beat that. So this is kind of a long-running thing that now we've got this action space, but I've also got a geometry space. I don't need either. I don't need the action space here. I can just let the geometry space just build something between there and there and whatever. But then I have to make sure that people can actually cross it. So in keeping with the other side of my AI research field, and also to make sure I don't get publicly ostracized, I started experimenting with the idea of using a Monte Carlo tree search solver that can then play through this particular segment of the gameplay space and beat it. And anybody who does any AI research will know, if you're not doing MCTS by this stage, you might as well just give up your career, because apparently it's the end thing at the moment. Hi, University of Essex. I love you guys, you're great. So why did I go to all this really, really onerous, lengthy babble about action spaces, geometry spaces? This all seems like an awful lot of work, right? Well, yeah, but I like this idea that on the fly, as soon as you hit the end of a sprint, I can swap these pieces out, right? Take that action space out, put this action generator in, right? Take this geometry generator out and put in a new one. Well, once we've built more than one at this point in time, it's like 4 action generators, but only 1 geometry generator. But also that there's independent budgets. And that's really useful to me as well, because I can then constrain it. I can also, one of the things I didn't mention is I can tell the action generator what actions it can and cannot do in a given sprint. Now this is really useful for me, because I can then allow to ease players in, I can relax certain constraints. But also with budgets, if I increase the action budget but don't change the geometry budget, it means that there's going to be a slight increase in number of actions, but the complexity of that environmental space is probably going to be easier to navigate. Conversely, I can leave the action space where it was and crank the geometry budget higher, which means that, well, I could actually potentially get exactly the same sequence of actions, but it becomes harder to cross it, because the geometry generator's now got more toys to play with. And you think, again, why am I going to such lengthy reasons? And it actually comes down to watching people play the game. So this is one of these wonderful things where being a researcher who's never really thought about making a video game then has to deal with the reality of the fact they've made a video game, in that I'm getting adults who are hogging the game at games festivals. These are both photographs taken at Game City, and folk on the left who are like, yeah, we're really into this, and they would swap over and they'd take turns, they play it again and again and again, and they get quite excited and almost violent in some cases. There was almost violence at one point. It was play violence. It was cool. But conversely, I've also got kids playing the game. And one thing, first of all, that you have to make sure that if kids want to play this game, and they want to play this game because there's all these happy, colourful characters, and they go, look at this. It looks so bright, it looks so colourful, I want to play this game. They play it for 10 seconds and go, oh my God, what the hell, no. Mum, I don't like this game, it's so hard and annoying and aggressive. And we thought, well, can't I then scale it down and ensure I can even have a baby mode? In fact, there is a baby mode, I've written it. You know, it's just very simple generation. It's actually simple enough that a baby with an iPad can just... and they probably won't die, for at least for 20 seconds or so. But then I can crank it up for the adults, but then don't ever discredit the ability of a child in a video game. That half the adults are rubbish at this because it's not Call of Duty, and then I get a 10-year-old who just... Game City last week, ongoing battle because we had a competition. Whoever it was that could traverse the furthest number of kilobytes in the game, because we measure things in kilobytes because I thought it was kind of funny. Roll with it, roll with it. We had a dude, Jamal, who was about, I think he must have been about 22, 23-year-old. And William, who was about, I want to say 11. And this just war broke out between these two fellas for about 30 minutes. And the parents are like, come on, William, we're going to go. He's like, not yet! He's trying to see if he can beat the game again and again. And so, sure, I want to be able to scale it down to allow, not just for children, but for people who aren't comfortable with this sort of game, but also, I want to be able to crank it up for people who really fancy a challenge. Now, it's not all just about building platforms and long, drawn-out action sequences, etc. We'd started trying to make it so that the game world is also largely influenced by what the generator's doing, even in the simplest and silliest of ways. So, for example, we actually have all these cities that you can go through, and we actually broke the world up into sectors, and each sector is sort of like a world. Sort of like Super Mario Brothers. Again, I steal all my good ideas from Nintendo. And we had this idea of, well, why don't we have different sectors that represent different places, and then they can mutate the game in interesting ways. So in the build recently, we had Cashville, which C-A-C-H-E-ville, because it's funny, right? Work with it. That's their hometown of all the pixelites, but also we can go to places like Keisan, which is the Japanese city, Pixeli, which is the Russian sector, Russian for pixels, see what I'm doing? And Hal, which is the moon. And that turns down gravity. But we've also got a couple other ones. Right now I need to come up with some better names for them because they're currently known as, what was it? Convict sector, because the world flips upside down. And there was acid trip zone, which I just haven't figured out what it is, but I just turned the chromatic aberration up on the camera and it just looks amazing. But the name of the sector, because it's meant to be a sector of a hard disk, we thought, well, why don't we have it so that the actual names that it generates are a reflection of where they are? Now, sure, we're going to have Pixeli, but you go into like 4 or 5 different sectors of Pixeli, and it changes every time, and it's actually then influenced by the total number of MIPS that have spawned in the area, the total number of platforms that have spawned in the area, and also just a few other little bits and bobs of the current sector, and it hashes it all together and comes up with that address. And you think, cool, some people are going to find that really interesting, other people couldn't give a flying, but you know. The thing is that, as well as that, we decided to do all these other things, just because we thought it's funny. Now, what we're building into the next iteration of the game is that we actually have a little welcome sign when you go in. And we wanted players to have some sort of sense of progression and accomplishment, so they're going to different places, they're learning about different places. We could even make it a challenge that you visit a certain world. That if I'm going to have all this random generation going on, wouldn't it be cool if I kind of let the players feel as if that this is part of their exploration of our world, because we're currently planning to have about 25 to 50 different sectors in the game. And then you can explore all these different places, and we're going to put hidden sectors in it. We're going to have the programmer art sector, which we're just going to make it what you saw in one of the first slides earlier, but it's just all blocks. I think it's going to be great fun, and the artists are going to hate us, but you know, they can't get near the code base because they break the build all the time. Matt, I'm talking to you. But yeah, so we had this idea, you know, let's just make it richer. So the backgrounds that happen, we have a lot of prefabricated buildings, and we're just going to glue it all together. We glue the walls in the background, we glue the sky on, so that you get this sense of progression. You've went into a whole new place. And players get excited about this. We saw this when we took it to Game City. I've made it to the moon! And then, by the way, watch out, gravity's turned down because you're on the moon. What? And then they fall and die, and they go, I want to get back to the moon, right? Go. Pfft. How many runs do I need to get to the moon? I don't know, because it's currently procedurally generated. About 6. Keep going. It'll be fine. But But the other things that the census data of each sector is generated dynamically. So first of all, like I said, the name is generated dynamically. We also tell them, so the name of the sector, the town's elevation, which is based on the highest platform that it generated, the processing power of the sector, which is based on the number of MIPS it spawned, and the population of the town as well, which is a weird hash of all of it. So you get this idea that and also we're going to put twin cities in it, which we thought would actually be spawned off of another sector that maybe you haven't visited yet, or a sector that could possibly occur. Because then we can build challenges. Can you visit the twin city of, like, you go to Picchiele 0x3FA? Can you, meet its twin city, which is Ksan 0x4F2? Sure, people might get excited about that. I don't know. Like, this is what achievements are for. You can just hook people in, and they'll just play the game for like 50,000 hours. Which we should have charged them more than 69 pence, but I digress. So, this is kind of where we've got to. If you consider this like, there's the long-term research goal. Any researcher in the room can appreciate this. You had some long-winded, highfalutin idea, and it's a 5-step plan. I think we're currently like 1.5 of the way through it. Because I haven't even, the whole point of this is still so far away. But one of the things we started looking at, and this has been really interesting, is that now that I'm actually making a game and people are playing it, they're going, did you think about doing this? Did you think about doing that? And I go, no. It's an interesting research problem, actually. Well, let's see if I could go away and I could do this, and then I could just go and write a bunch of papers. No, that's not how we're doing it. We're supposed to be doing this as a game. So with that, we actually started expanding the character roster. So originally we only had Pixel Pete, and then because I didn't, imbue gender upon a freaking cube, I felt that at minimum I had to put in Polygon. She's my favorite anyway. She actually handles better than Pete. I know, because I programmed them both. But also the top little character, that's Blip, and the character in the middle is Plunk. So this was like, right, okay, so we can have different characters, and this will be really useful for us. And I'm going to come back to that, because there was all this other stuff that I can now just do really easily. Daily challenges, weekly challenges, monthly challenges. If you're not familiar with how to do that, you just seed the procedural generator. Whenever you start your random number initialization, you can say, just give it this number. This is how Spelunky does it. And they did a pretty good job of that, so I'm thinking I'll steal that idea. It's not Mario, but it's a close second. Also, I'm just trying to keep my artists busy, because they're now going, when are we launching? We've got all this art in the build. When's it? No. Go make like a whole bunch of new cities and sectors and make character skins and all this sort of stuff. Just go away. Leave us to work with the programming. For me, the really interesting stuff that's now coming, the harder stuff, which we're working on right now, can we then, if we've got 4 different characters, let the characters influence the geometric space? Plunk is sort of like the Hulk. Plunk actually jumps really high, can not jump as far, but he's far more aggressive. He's a big fella. Whereas, say, Blip doesn't jump very high, but Blip can move very quickly. Can we then take exactly the same action that I was originally building geometrically and then have it parameterized based upon the character you're using, so that I'm not building a jump that Plunk could make, but Blip can't? Shouldn't it be if it's Blip I'm playing as, I want to be able to ensure that every time I generate that jump, Blip can make it? But also player influences. Can we model what the player's doing, and then based upon what the player's doing, can I screw with them a little bit? You seem to really like that power-up. I'm now going to create a level where you can't use it. Or if you do use it, I'm going to just, punish you for doing so. I kind of get into this idea of just harming players, really. But also, really interesting generative systems. We're starting to work on multiplayer, because this all came purely from, I think it was the Norwich Gaming Festival, where we had one mother and 4 kids fighting over the same pad. She goes, would you ever consider doing like multiplayer split screen? I'm like, nah, I didn't really think about that. Oh, yes, I could go and make a new procedural generator that's built solely for work. Well, then we could have all this splitting off and coming together and weaving together. Yeah, sure, we'll do it for next year. And then everyone else in the team going, what? Like, just work with me, it'll be fine. So we've got this idea now that what happens if you all start on your own street? Do all these then different highways meet in the middle and they start blurring within each other? What happens when you start having 4 people trying to run across the same bit of terrain? Well, first of all, we've already tried it with this. It gets a bit messy. So let's build more terrain. Let's make it more explosive, make it more expansive, and then see what we can do with that. I think that would be really fun. And then there's the stuff so far in the future that I've not even touched yet. Music, I'd love to get some sort of dynamic music going on in here, because we've got so much real-time data we're accruing from the actual physical space, as well as the action space, and also what the player's doing. Can I exploit that for some sort of musical purposes? I want to actually make a sprint editor, because I love this idea that you could do a Dark Souls, and create a really horrible level and then inject it up into the system and then go, see, that's my friend over there. Punish them. And then like your friend's like, oh no, I don't play it as hard as my other friend because I'm not that good at, oh my God, what have they done? And it's like, Dave's infected your game. I think that's a really interesting idea. I don't know how well that would work. And lastly, just stealing all these great ideas from Tanagra. Like, can we actually have some collaboration and distribution? Can I steal all these procedurally generated elements that are happening locally, throw it up on a server, collate all the players and say, well, you guys are all roughly the same sort of people. What happens if I throw this at you? Do you like it? No, you don't, do you? No, you don't. Keep doing it, keep doing it. Right, we'll give you something else. I kind of like this idea of taking procedurally generated content for one instance and then throwing it in someone else's instance just to kind of screw with them. Whether or not that works, I don't know. We'll wait until what parents say to me in about a year's time. Anyway, I'm kind of finished babbling. And with that, thank you very much. Yeah. Never a dull moment.
Absolutely. That was really great. Thanks so much. Any questions for me?
Oh, right. Front row heckle. Here we go.
So you constantly kept talking about having to build into your generator in a way that doesn't include your biases. But I mean, have you actually achieved that, or do you have a bias of, oh, this sort of obstacle or this particular Y differential is this hard, and that's sort of captured somewhere in code? Or
yeah, so at first the idea was, let's actually create a very biased interpretation of this game, have the frameworks in place that I can throw out the biased ones and start putting in unbiased ones, and then sort of take it from there. So the non-biased interpretations of much of the generative system is still in the branch of Doom. I haven't put it into a commercial build that we've actually shown to people yet, because it's that whole thing of, well, I think this is interesting, but then I'm going to end up with parents or kids just not really resonating with it. So I thought, well, we could maybe make these, and this has been a big discussion with us, like, when do we let Tommy just go loose, go nuts, and just put in that one generator that when players see it, they go, holy fuck, what is that? And we thought we'd start trying to make that into actual special events or like sequences that can take place in the game that kind of throw you off. But by and large, we keep the kind of biased thing as the main gameplay experience. So I'm still tinkering with it. And you saw one of the geometric generators I've been working on, that in time, once I'm happy enough that those are quote unquote stable, I can then throw them in. But I don't want to make them the core gameplay experience, because I do think that that will actually turn people away by default.
Right. Because you set up the biases by observing players and making sure that they're just right.
So I'm thinking at times I want to have it largely that it is kind of player focused, but other times I can then just throw that out and just really screw with people, because it's funny, really.
Sure. Tom, do you want to? Oh, can I
So how much of the observation is just casual over-the-shoulder observation, and how much of it is analytics and data collection and processing out?
Cool. At the moment, it's largely over the shoulder. We do have some data mining that takes place in actual player bit modeling during the game, but we haven't really. Again, it's like one of these things that we're keeping all the kind of really twisted and crazy things in the branch of Doom for the time being, because I think we wanted to at least present that we've got a game that's not going to annoy people by default. So we've done a lot of stuff where, much as in any case when you get a video game, when you're watching people playing it and going, huh, that's an interesting interpretation, I didn't see that before. Right, okay, maybe we should try to take that on board, etc. So at the moment, a lot of the tweaks that we made are done by hand, but also a lot of the generative systems are entirely automated at this stage. The only thing that we actually tweak in that space is the obstacle spawning. The obstacle spawning on the geometric generator is actually done by me saying, curb it on this particular platform for this action space, because I've seen 125 people all die there, and then they look at me because they know I wrote the level generator, so they go, ugh! And it's interesting, that whole thing of I go, dude, it's a procedural generator. But they go, yeah, but you wrote it. Which in itself, I think, is just fascinating, because they're associating blame with me for something that's entirely pseudo-random. But so I'm even more worried when we start moving to the next phase, and I go, well, actually, yeah, it made that decision because it's been watching how you play, and then it made a decision based upon that process. And I had really nothing to do with it. But you wrote it! What do you want from me? It's an artificial intelligence, remember? But hey.